Alrighty, everyone, thanks for joining us all tonight. Walawani Nindawan, Nayaga Kiran, Nayaga Din, Waniwandin. My name is Kieran Stewart Ashton and I'm going to be your facilitator tonight. I'm a proud traditional owner from Waniwandin country, up on what you now know as the south coast of New South Wales. I'm going to start off tonight with an acknowledgement of country. Now, unfortunately, in my opinion, quite often we hear token acknowledgements being given. People, especially settlers, often say acknowledgements in such a procedural format without actually really recognising or understanding what it is that they're actually acknowledging. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Where we are today is Wurundjeri lands of the Kulin Nation. Their sovereignty, like all of our sovereignty as First Peoples, has never legally been ceded. Not by our laws, not by British laws, and not by international law. As a result, the colonial state of Australia is an illegal occupation. Neither the Federation of the British Colonies in 1901, nor the passing of 237 years changes that fact. We still live in an illegal occupation. An occupation whose wealth was built by our people's stolen land, our stolen resources, and our forced labour, as well as the forced labour of our Kanak brethren stolen from the South Sea Islands. And the wealth and prosperity for settlers is still sustained today, not only by our ongoing occupation and genocide, but by the blood of the Global South as well, blood spilled by the hands of Western imperialism. I want to take a quick moment of silence for all of us to reflect on that, and to show our respect to those victims of genocide, colonialism and imperialism. Thank you. Now, I'm going to give a quick run through of tonight as well. We're here to talk about genocide, sovereignty and self-determination. The Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide defines what genocide is. It was created in 1948 and was brought into force under international law in 1951. When we look at this convention, we see that this occupying force is guilty of every single act of genocide defined in those set of laws. Every single one. To start the night off, we're going to hear from some of the interveners in the King Charles genocide case. We've got Aunty Ungai Barb Flick, Sister and Senator Lydia Thorpe, and myself. Then we're going to be talking about self-determination. We've got the esteemed Professor Irene Watson, who will outline her ideas about developing a sovereign First Peoples Court and how that could operate, which is something that we would like to bring to life in the new year. As I mentioned before, after that we'll have a short break for a cuppa and some food, and then return to hear Uncle Robbie talk about where we were at with the Crime Scene Australia campaign, and to hear from Aunty Soon Hasseldine to discuss what genocide looks like today out in her country, Guggafa country. Finally, we have a short question time towards the end for anyone in the audience who has questions. And we'll have a short segment to discuss as well how and where people can actually provide support to the campaigns, the initiatives and the struggles that we are going to be discussing tonight. Because not only do we need people like yourself coming along to passively support and hear about what we are doing, but we also need your active support in the form of donations, in giving up some of your time and skills to help with the logistics and the organising, and to help us not only spread the word, but to fight this good fight. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick recap on what has led us to tonight. Now, there is decades that has led us to tonight, so I'm going to try and make it as brief and concise as I can. Uncle Robbie has dedicated a significant part of his life pursuing the case of genocide in the courts. In 1994, when Uncle Robbie joined with the late warriors Wodjila Binna, Isabel Coe, Billy Craigie and Kevin Buzzacott to prosecute crimes of genocide, they weren't successful because despite genocide being the most heinous of all crimes, it was not actually a crime in Australian law. Whilst Australia ratified the Genocide Convention in 1949, ratification of a convention does not directly affect Australian domestic law until implementing legislation is enacted. Now, this didn't happen here until 2002, when the Rome Statute came into force internationally and it created the ICC. And as this colony had ratified the statute, the Australian government was then required to enact the international crimes of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity into local law, where they now sit under Division 268 of the Commonwealth Criminal Code Act. But we know that genocide continues today, and that brings us to the case that Uncle Robbie is pursuing today, attempting to prosecute the British King Charles III for ongoing offences in an Aboriginal genocide case. On the 20th of October 2023, a charge sheet signed by Dr. Aunty Alma Thorpe and Uncle Robbie Thorpe was lodged at the Melbourne Magistrates Court against Charles Philip Arthur George Windsor for the ongoing Aboriginal genocide in violation of Aboriginal law, Australia's criminal code, and the long-established international law, particularly the 1948 UN Genocide Convention and the 2002 Statute of the International Criminal Court. The Magistrates Court of Victoria made a decision in December 2023 not to issue proceedings, saying the case was frivolous and vexatious. Now, what that means is that the courts believed the case to be trivial and lacking merit, and that it was being brought forward to harass, annoy, or cause hardship to the so-called king. Uncle Robbie sought a judicial review, and the case was heard by Victorian Supreme Court Justice Melinda Richards in July 2024. And whilst there has been some useful findings in her judgment, she again agreed with the Magistrates Court decision. Now, there was going to be a case tomorrow morning, but if you haven't heard yet, that has been adjourned until sometime in May 2026. That being said though, as I mentioned before, we do need people to continue to show up and support, so not only keep that in your diary for May next year, but later in the month, actually on December the 16th, there is going to be another case that's happening at the Melbourne Magistrates Court, the Cruz Brothers case. Now, the Cruz Brothers are some of my mob actually from up on the Yuan Nation in the South Coast, they're being charged with so-called poaching for going out and traditionally harvesting some abalone. So get down and support them on the day as well. There is also a case on the 23rd of January, a hearing of charges of trespass, which Uncle Robbie brought against Governor of Victoria, which was served on the 12th of November. Now, it is important that people do show up to these cases and do actually try and be there on the day. It's important for a bunch of reasons, not only to show Uncle Robbie and other people support, but it actually creates what's known as a bit of public interest for the judges and the magistrates, and it compels them to actually hear the cases and to actually act on it because it's now a case that's in the public's interest. Now, part of the reason that we wanted to have this panel tonight is because the courts have struck out the application for the interveners who tried to join in on that case that was originally tomorrow, the case against King Charles. And whilst they were struck out, we won't have the opportunity to participate, but we wanted the opportunity for some of us to get up and to share our reasons for intervening and what evidence was going to be presented in support of the genocide case. Now, to start that off, I'm going to hand over to you, Aunty Barb. If you want to talk first a bit about the evidence that you wanted to bring forward at the case and why you were intervening.
Yamamelia. Hello, friends. Ngayani, Bigambul, Gamaroi, Uali. I am Gamaroi, Bigambul, Uali. I have lived for 74 years in this country, and every failed government policy has almost decimated my people. But our resilience has been strong, and our resistance has been strong. I grew up knowing the stories of my great-great-granny Susan of Welltown Station, a Bigambul woman. She was born only 66 years after Philip, sailed off Yarra Bay with the first settlers. She led a group of people who kept the settlers off her lands for 14 years through guerrilla warfare. They killed the stock on the land so the settlers couldn't make money. They participated in hand-to-hand combat. They burned the drays that the settlers brought in to feed their stock. In 1845, there was a select committee meeting in Brisbane which set up the native police force, and with the military, they went out to Biggamore country, to great-great-granny Susan's country, and out of 3,000 Biggamore people, only 300 survived. I grew up with my grandmother at Brewarrina, and that was our way. That was our way. Our grandmothers looked after us until we were school age. My father wasn't allowed to go to school, so I was the first generation that went to school. Just outside of Brewarrina, there's a place called Hospital Creek, and the massacre that took place at Hospital Creek killed 400 people, men, women and children. The British brought their military tactics with them when they came here, and dawn raids was a favourite. So picture a large group of people living on their country, sun's coming up, the babies are crying to be fed, the people are making fires, starting breakfast, and they can hear the thunder of horses' hooves and the yelling and the sound of pistol shots being fired into the air. And they raided that little camp with their swords and bullets, and they slashed and shot 400 of my people. Genocide? Yes. The Myall Creek massacre in Gomeroi country, which is part of my country. Oh, there was a rumour that a sheep was killed on the station. So they set out a raiding party, and they found a settlement of about 27 people having supper on the river. So they set about with their guns and swords again. And then halfway through that massacre, a lot of people were dying from their wounds. They thought, we can't leave this evidence, so they made a big fire and they threw the bodies onto the fire, people who were still alive. So it went to court and they were all acquitted. 11 people went to court and were acquitted. A new judge had just arrived from Britain after that, and he wanted to look at that matter again. So I went to court again. 7 people were eventually charged. They were given a death sentence. 2 of them were hanged, and there was such a public outcry that they wouldn't punish the others. So the settlers decided that bragging about shooting these people, they'd start poisoning their water holes. So there have been different tactics and strategies over the year, but the genocide has continued. 609 people died in custody, in police custody, since the recommendations of the Royal Commission came down. Lydia is still screaming in Parliament for the implementation of over 300 recommendations. I think they implemented one, and that was a body count. They would count how many people died in custody. My second cousin, Eddie Murray, was killed in Weewar jail. I'll just finish with this story. It's a personal story of my family. My dad and I went to the police cells on the request of Eddie's mother and father, and The cop that took us into the cell where he died said he tore a strip of the blanket, put it on that hook and hung himself. And I said, Eddie was shorter than me and he couldn't have reached that hook. Well, we get to the inquest and the cop was asked a question, is this the blanket that was in Eddie's cell? Yes, it looks like that. Could you tear a strip? No, this big burly cop could not tear a strip of that blanket. The officers' notebooks were presented. They were whited out and the times were all over the place. The cop that we thought had killed Eddie got up and testified that he wasn't on duty that day. So they produced the roster. Yes, he was on duty that day. So what were the findings? I thought to myself, they're not going to get away with it this time. But the findings was that his life was taken by person or persons unknown. Well, who was in the police cell or the police station? Nothing but police. This genocide goes on today. Now we're targeting 10-year-old Aboriginal children. They took the stolen generation, my grandmother, my dearly beloved grandmother, who took care of me, was taken away as a child. My mum was taken at 14 to work on a station, to look after the kids, to do the cooking, the cleaning and the laundry by hand. She was only released because my grandmother got her a job at the local hospital. These stories that come to us, like Wayne told us, come down through the generations. These are personal stories. I feel like I can reach down into history and still touch the pain and the suffering that our people endure. And this continues to this day. So that's why I'm supporting Robbie, Aunty Alma, who I have known by word of mouth for since the 60s, because she has been a hero right across this country. I never met her in person until tonight, but her name has been carried to. She's a great activist and a great heroine as far as I'm concerned, and lots of other people know her name. Whitefellas law written on paper. You can chuck it in the fire, you can rip it into pieces and make a new one. They keep giving us scraps, you know. Oh, we'll enact land rights in New South Wales, we'll write it all up. Then we'll amend it and amend it and amend it and change it and change it. Our law doesn't change. You can't change our law. That's come down from generation to generation. We all know about it. But their law, they can change it every time that Parliament sits down in that colonial headquarters on that hill in Canberra. But we'll fight on, generations and generations will fight on until we get justice in this country.
I want to thank Aunty for sharing our story and for coming down all the way down here tonight as well and jumping up on the panel and having a yarn. And this is what we're talking about. You know, that story is just one of many stories that the court has decided is not relevant to the case. It's not relevant to genocide prosecution here in this colony. That's the stories that the court is denying here. And it's as Aunt was saying, it's ongoing. 609 deaths, at least, since the 1991 Royal Commission, only 34 years ago. I think it was the other day, we had the very first of all of those deaths, the very first time when a copper has actually been found guilty. And don't get me wrong, that's such a benchmark. But why is it taking so long? And even then, you go and look what he was actually found guilty of. He wasn't found guilty of murder, he was found guilty of negligence. That's the reality that we still live with here in this colony. Our people are more likely to go to jail than they are to graduate high school. That was a statistic that was true when I graduated high school, 15, 16 years ago now? And it's still a stat that's true today. I want to hand it over next to Lydia to have a bit of a yarn about why you were intervening in the case and what evidence you wanted to bring forward.
Just said to Uncle Rob, what was my evidence? The King is a criminal and he's... is this working?
Yeah.
Before I say anything, though, I just want to say that I'm really honoured to be amongst such staunch matriarchs, particularly, and Nan, who's 90. That's where we learnt it from, Al. And thank you, Aunty, for acknowledging Nan Alma, because Nan's as staunch as they come, and I wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for Nan. And you, of course, Uncle Rob, because I didn't graduate high school. I graduated Gertrude Street at the Career Information Centre. And so my evidence, I suppose, is all of the legislation that they impose in this colony against our people, the fact that Labor and the Coalition are complicit in the ongoing genocide of our people. I put in a bill to remove the fiat of the Attorney General, which is what all colonisers have done around the world. Yes, we have a genocide convention. Yes, this country is signed up to the genocide convention, but there is a clause in that convention that says the Attorney General will decide who puts a case of genocide in the courts and who doesn't. Same with England, same with New Zealand and Canada. All the colonised countries have got this one little Attorney General's fiat. So I put in a bill to change that, to have that overturned, remove his power, or her power now, because it's a woman, Michelle Rowlands, if you want to email her and tell her that she's also complicit, even though she's, a black woman, she's still complicit. And so that got voted down. Only the Greens and myself voted for that piece, and Fatima Payman voted for that piece of legislation, because that would have enabled so many genocides to be heard, not only the genocide against our people, but Palestine, Kanaki, West Papua, and now Sudan. So unfortunately, that's the case, and I'm about to put in a package, a red lines package of bills that are relating to the ongoing genocide, and looking at ways that we can stop weapons coming out of this country and contributing to the genocide across the world, particularly in Palestine right now. So that will be coming in the start of Parliament next year, which is February, and there's a whole range of components to that package. That's why it's called a package. There's 4 elements to that package. I can't roll them off the top of my head. I've been in estimates all day, which is another colonial process that denies our rights, questioning the Attorney General's department on why they won't implement the recommendations to the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. There's always an excuse, and they continue to fund the police to commit the genocide. So one of my questions today is why you've given $220 million to the Northern Territory Police out of Closing the Gap money, and that was because, you know, it's to keep communities safer. I got told to take my earrings off, which I only wore for this event. It's how I got dressed today, but I just happened to do the estimates as well and was told that it's not appropriate because they could see "Not My King" written on my earrings, which a young Aboriginal woman made for me, you know. So I had to change them, put other ones on, snakes I put on, and then had to put these back on to come here. But yeah, I mean, I've got so many examples of the ongoing genocide, and what I did by yelling at the king that day is what my ancestors would have done and what my matriarchs would have done, and I had matriarchs around the country saying the only thing I was disappointed about is that I wasn't there to do it with you. So I'll continue that pressure, and I want to give the microphone back to my old people. Thank you.
Thanks, Lydia. Appreciate it. I'm just going to quickly talk about my intervening application as well. So I wanted to join the case because genocide is something that is of a lot of importance and relevance to me as a proud Yuin man. My ancestors were some of the first people to be impacted by colonisation here on this continent. Now, I'm not going to go off on a big massive tangent about native title. It's something I could talk about for a long time and all the issues with that. But you might be familiar with the term Dharawal. It's now seen as a nation up on just south of Kamay or Botany Bay, as you would know it. Dharawal was actually a language group of the Yuin people. It wasn't its own nation until native title come and drew a bunch of false borders there and divided us up. But they were the first people to be impacted by Captain Cook when he first come here in 1770. Now, my people up and down the south coast, now we saw Cook's ship coming up the coast with those big white sails, and we called him Gurungubba. In our language, that's the big, greedy white pelican. We had a dreaming story that told us about the coming of a big white pelican that would come along and will snatch everything up, snatch up all our land, all our resources, all our people. That dreaming story goes way back before Cook was even born, and lo and behold, it come true for us one day. Now, when they did, they come and they stole the land, they stole the resources, they laid claim over our lands, our plants, our animals, and our people. They stole everything that we had. In many ways, you know, they even stole a lot of ourselves as Aboriginal people. Not just our lives, but they stole so much of our culture, so much of our history and our heritage. Now, I want to talk about two things that they didn't steal, though, two things that they actually left here. One was when Cook first got off his boat up there in Kamay, there was two Gweagal fellas up there, two warriors on the shore telling him to leave, that he wasn't welcome here. Now, white historians will tell you that there was no shots fired, but we know that to be a lie. One of those two people was Puman. He was shot in the leg by Cook's landing party. And not only do we have the yarns about that have been passed down, there's actually hard evidence of that sitting over in a museum. It's called the Gweagal Shield. It's a shield that Cook's landing party stole, and there's a bullet hole right in the shield where you can see where they were shot out. That's one of the things they left. The other thing they left was the sickness. There was smallpox and it was other diseases. Now, our mob have yarns that go back to that time that talk about a great sickness that spread across the land, killed something like 90% of our people. That was the first case of biological warfare used against us here. That was genocide. Using biological contaminants to wipe out a people. It's a war crime as well. Now, coincidentally or not, they'd done that 18 years before the first fleet came. And 18 years is about the life cycle for a smallpox plague to play through a population. So it's awfully suspicious if you ask me, especially when they try and claim that it was an accident or, you know, that they didn't mean to. But that's what happened back in the 1770 and onwards to my mob. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about in the genocide case was the ongoing stuff that's still happening up in my country. So my home community is Wreck Bay. It's up on the south coast of New South Wales near Jervis Bay, if you've ever heard of that, or it's about a 20-minute, half-hour drive from Nowra, if you know where that is. Wreck Bay is a small mission with a population that fluctuates between about 140 to 200 people. Today, it has some of the highest recorded per capita rates of cancer in Australia's history. We have children and young people with tumours. We have people dying prematurely. We have shocking rates of sterility and birth defects, of asthma and other respiratory complications, and all of it can be traced back to the naval base, whose airfield and training facilities are literally only 1 or 2 kilometres away from the mission. This naval base is HMAS Creswell. It's one of the main training facilities for the Royal Australian Navy. During the 1980s, or maybe even earlier, they started using PFAS, or PFAS as it's known, as a part of their firefighting drills. Now, if you don't know what PFAS is, it stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and it's a group of man-made chemicals that have a range of uses, one of them being flame retardant in firefighting foams. Now, that foam would then, they use that foam in their training for their fire drills at HMAS Creswell. And that foam would then run off downhill into the local creeks and streams, many of which would then feed into Wreck Bay's main town water drinking supply, as well as the local bays and beaches where we would harvest our seafood and the surrounding bushlands where we would get our traditional foods and medicines from. Now, it's debatable whether or not the Navy knew the full health impacts when they first started using those chemicals there. There is every chance that, at first, it was an accidental act, given the benefit of the doubt, I suppose. But although I will say, accident or not, it is still grossly negligent on their behalf and such a disgusting and despicable thing. And even under Australian laws, negligence causing harm or death is still supposedly considered a crime. Or at least it is when it happens to white people. But there become a point when, even if it was an accident at first, that they continued to use these chemicals knowing full well that they did have negative health impacts. A few years back, I was heavily involved in the campaigns around this stuff, trying to raise awareness and get to the bottom of it all. During this time, the Navy repeatedly lied and changed their story to cover up their involvement and to try and hide the impacts. There were times when they told us that PFAS had no negative health impacts at all, only to admit later that it did when they were caught out with the facts. But then they would try and claim that it was localised to the base and it didn't spread to the surrounding areas. And when we had independent people come in and determine that it had, they admitted it did, but claimed that it wasn't at high enough concentrations and that it wasn't in the drinking supply or in our foods. Then they'll change the story again and admit it was, but at low concentrations that wouldn't impact our health apparently. They deny it wasn't in our town drinking water, only for us to find out, again independently, that it was. They tried to tell us that they stopped using those chemicals in the 90s, but we've had whistleblowers from the Navy come forward and tell us that they were still actually using them as recently as 2011 to clear out the old stock. For us, the evidence is right throughout our community though. We need only to look around at our mob to see the impact that it's actually had. Both of my maternal grandparents died of cancer. I've had uncles and aunties die prematurely of cancer, decades earlier than our already low life expectancy. I've got extended family members who have died from or are currently diagnosed with cancer, and I've got immediate family members who have either been diagnosed with cancer or are currently being screened for it because it looks like they have it. And that's just my mob, one of several mobs that live out on that mission, who all have similar stories. When we consider, like I said at the start, that Australia is an illegal occupation, what else do you call it when the occupying military has caused mass civilian death and sickness from chemicals that is used? You call it the use of chemical weapons. What else is it except a war crime and an act of genocide? Especially when you consider that they continued to use it after they knew the impacts it would have and was already having on our community. We've had no justice either. Our mob did win a class action against the Navy a few years back, but that class action was just to do with the devaluation of our lands and the impacts of our culture. It had nothing to do with the health and sickness or the deaths of our people by this chemical. And at the end of the day, all we got was a few measly $1,000 each. At most, some people got about 10 grand, but 10 grand to compensate us for poisoning and contaminating our lands, and for the fact that we can't hunt, gather or fish on our lands for hundreds of years to come, because this chemical has a life cycle that's hundreds of years before it breaks down. That's $10,000 to compensate hundreds of years worth of generations from being cut off from our culture and being able to practice our culture out on our traditional lands. Now, it's also pretty ironic when you consider that they just gave $368 billion to the Navy to buy a bunch of nuclear submarines, but they give us a lousy couple of grand each. And like I said, there's still been no justice around the actual health impacts or the deaths. So that was something that I wanted to bring forward to the genocide case as well, because this is something that is still very much ongoing up in my country. Now, we've heard a bit about all of this important evidence, and it's clear that we do have a case for prosecuting genocide here. I want to point out that, we do have contempt for the courts because we know that we will never see justice in the colonial court system. That is essentially part of this illegal occupation of our sovereign people's land, and that they do not have jurisdiction here. These courts have allowed the theft of our lands and the ongoing oppression of our people. It's almost impossible for us to access the colonisers' own laws to get any justice. The courts here deny the voices like those that we've just heard, like my own, like Lydia's, like Aunty Barb's, and like all of the other interveners in the case. Because of this, we are beginning to envision what a sovereign people's justice system could actually look like. And in early 2026, we plan to model this. And someone who has significant experience and has put a lot of energy into beginning to do that work is Professor Irene Watson, who we are going to have now give us a bit of an update on where all that's at and a bit of a run through what it might look like, and just to have a bit of a talk about it. And if you want to talk about that, Aunt.
Is this it? Okay. Matakaral, and special Matakaral to Aunty Alma, who was the main reason why I come, was the opportunity to be able to sit next to her spark. And to begin with, to listening to the hopelessness, or it could be one word, of where we're standing, and that statement of never give up. I look at Aunty Alma and I think she's iconic, and to think of all of the stories of our old people, so many of them being so much the same story, and never give up, and comes out tonight and is with us is such a big gift for me. So never give up. And when we're looking at where to from here, we stand and we build upon giants that come before us. So that's the future I see, that it's filled with hope, and there's lots of opportunities in the face of the impossible global space that we look out at each day. And when we come back to our story, the story of big trauma, the trauma of genocide, and nowhere for that to be heard or enabled or even engaged with, is the ongoing trauma, the ongoing, as Robbie has always well said, the genocide itself and the different pieces that come with that. We talk about genocide, but there's all the different, there's genocide, sits with ecocide. And when we talk about genocide and the very limits of that in terms of Western jurisprudence, what that, the murder, the intentional murder, the eradication of peoples is just focusing on human beings. But the bigger part of that picture is our connection to country, to land which has its own speaking voice, has its own sovereignty, and our connected, collaborative sovereignty with each other and country. So there's the piece on ecocide. There's the Terra Nullius story of the juricide, the killing of law. I mean, so what I'm just painting a bit of a picture here that we can talk about genocide, but the story is much bigger. Linguicide. linguicide, the eradication of our languages, deliberate, intentional, epistemicide, our knowledge systems, our very way of being, our ontologies, our philosophies. And, you know, we're in this ongoing battle of this idea of equality. I'm not interested myself, and a lot of my old people have never been interested in equality with the Western jurisprudential property ownership, control, enslavement of country. We have a much bigger idea of what our connection to country is. So we think about genocide and the stories and the impossibility of even being able to sit and have justice, hear these stories, is even bigger than that. There's all of the other pieces that go with that, of the damage and the destruction, not only of peoples but our connections, our way of being, the way that we see the future, and the old people saw the future in our connections, that the way we are reduced to not even be able to grow our children with that knowledge is one of the things that makes me very sad, to see our grandchildren growing up in this globalised disorder, and we're denied to practice and to be and to teach our kids to take responsibility as Aboriginal peoples, to live healthy lives, to care for country. That our matriarchs, and looking at Susan here, the work that you've done in bush kindies, and you know that these are the things that we're here for, and we're denied. So the picture of genocide is a big one. The injustice of not being able to have that heard because of positivism, black letter law, you know, wrangling with the rules of what's allowed, as Lydia mentioned. You know, we've got to have the Attorney General tick the box before they unpadlock the gate so that you can even enter to be heard, is a travesty, is a sham, is genocide in itself. There's nowhere to speak of this. But people like Robbie and others, and all those that have supported and worked with, have never given up in the spirit of the old people. So what is to be done? Number one, never give up. We're banging against those gates that are padlocked alone. We are who we are, the First Peoples, always was, always will be. But more than the First Peoples, we are peoples who are evidence of the first, and I've said this before, I keep saying it until we get heard, evidence of the first inter-nations engagement of nations across the country. So to be denied by a racist doctrine such as terra nullius, to be denied to be peoples deemed to be without any legal capacity, without any laws, without the capacity to enter into legal relationships, etc., etc., is itself a genocide, a denial of our rightful legal position. I'm going to talk about the ancient model that we come from and that still lives in this country, and that of when you think about globalisation and you think about what is here and what exists, the hundreds of different languages, the hundreds of different legal systems, the hundreds of different relationships. And if we have been here, as we say, for more than 65,000 years, and we still can look at each other and greet each other from the different nations that we're coming from, there's nowhere else on the planet, I'd like to hear if there is, that can compare to that level of governance. Where else in the world, in ancient histories, are there over 500 different nations that have kept peace? We kept the peace in this country for all of that time. The evidence is in the languages, in the songlines, in the territorial connections that we have to country, to our capacity to keep the peace and relationships with each other, the respect, that there were no invasions or stealing of other people's land. And that's the depth of the ontological, philosophical ways of First Peoples in this country. So the first thing is what's to be done is, and I'm repeating myself and many of us are repeating ourselves, is that the very principle of terra nullius has to be realised in the way it has been applied to this country. It's not only a lie, it's a travesty, it's a sham, it's a genocide, it's a crime, an international law crime against humanity. But when you put it in a global context of who we are and what has happened in just 200 years and the story that is now told, the myth, the colonial myth of terra nullius itself, and to be reduced by the racism of terra nullius, it's clear to me that what is to be done is to never ever forget our history, because that is a big part of the story of this place. We can never ever forget that history. And all peoples who come to this place should know and should honour those facts. This is not storytelling, it's not a position, it's a fact. That's the diversity of this country. And the level of genocide and the arrogance and the racism where we're, as warriors like Robbie have, fighting in these colonial courts, and the racism of their rules and regulations to not even hear who we are, to not even have the integrity to admit that this continent is one of the most racist places in its treatment of human beings on this planet. And for us to continue to claw back a space, to be even able to have a conversation and having to tell our stories over and over again. As, Barbara has said, same story. The cattle being driven in, the murderous drive into our people's camps. Goes on and on and on, that we are subjected to having to tell these stories. I mean, think about it. Think about that position. So what is to be done? Never give up, we keep going. But it's a travesty, it's a genocidal process in itself that we are subjected to this position that we're served up policy after policy, and we engage for the very reason of enabling our peoples to put food on the table, to survive, to endure the history of the violence of all of the places we've been subjected to. So we never give up. But is there an alternative? You know, we're going to keep hammering away in the colonial courts, whether they're domestic or international. But one thing we need to do is to have a space that honours with integrity our voices, where we can freely tell those stories. But what jurisdiction will that be? You know, even if we get a friendly state that supports an application before the International Court of Justice. And I'm not saying we not do it or we do it. I mean, they're the options. There are some international options. There are also options where we can, at a domestic level and at an international level, assert and affirm our own sovereignty and jurisdiction. But it would be a plan. It would at least be a respectful space. Will it work? What works? I'm not sure to go on. I feel like I'm rambling here. I got off on... the point I'm making is that whatever we do, it has to be and it won't be. It has to be respectful of who we are. It has to fully, completely reject terra nullius. You know, we're stuck with Mabo. We're stuck with the High Court decision in Mabo. You know, and that's what we're dealing with. A court system that says, what did it say in Mabo? That we'll reject it, but we're not going to reject it really, because the entire colonial foundation will be will unfold. The scaffolding of the colonial foundation will come tumbling down. But we have the spin, and the spin is that we've rejected it and we've created native title, so all good. We know it's not all good 30 years later, no good at all. It's drawn us, assimilated, again, another form of genocide. I've argued that native title itself is an ingenious colonial tool of genocide. It's big thief, look good. You know, I mean, it's colonial spin. Very powerful. Look good while you...
I'll say one thing there. When that Nardo came down, it lost me. Really lost me. Anything. When they brought Nardo in, and they made it, you know, because I thought we might have a chance with Whitlam to get land rights, and said we got native title, which was a death blow to me anyway, as a person. Because it only made us tick boxes again, and that's all we've been doing is ticking boxes, and our own people turning against one another. under that system of organisations. And, you know, you can see it particularly in the Victoria and South Australia and Western, how it's caused strife with people who were turned against one another because of their organisations now. So you lost the big fight there because we were trying to win a war or win some sort of type thing, which we never ever. We've always won our war because they never beat us yet. They have to kill us. But I just feel that when I hear you talking and what finally comes out, where are our grandchildren going to stand in the future? Are we assimilated? Are we and under the assimilation program, I mean, it's still there, isn't it? It hasn't been cast out, has it? Assimilation, the Half Caste Act. While they're there, what are we going to do?
The Labor senators, they're all assimilated.
I haven't got no respect for the Parliament, actually. I'm sorry, Liz.
I think the language just changes. You know, they call it native title, but it's a form of assimilating First Peoples. High-level connection to country into a capitalist property system where it serves the purpose, the corporate service of providing a manufactured consent. Because when they come here to strip the earth bare and do what they do, behind the scenes they're asking questions like, how do we deal with the natives? Well, native title was a very clever resolution of that problem. It manufactures consent. It sets up just have a look at the way the whole process, the ILUAs, the agreements work. They don't constitute Aboriginal consent from an Aboriginal way of being and doing business. You know, and also, you know, talking earlier, do the people have the authority to consent? And this is where the West is slowly learning from Aboriginal peoples that country itself has a voice. You know, and this is being in this sort of Western, you know, the epistemicide, killing of our way of knowing and thinking. You take that away, and colonialism and capitalism has the free go it's had. Because from the way I know our way, we can't ever consent to what's coming in our territories, rare earth mining, for example. We can't agree to that. I don't have the authority. That's the authority of the country, and you know that's a bizarre. Well, that's an idea that Western jurisprudence, Western peoples, Western societies doesn't understand, and that's where they label us as the native, as the primitive, because it's deemed a primitive, native, savage idea. So this is the decolonial work we need to do. Every one of us needs to rethink how we think about this stuff and reposition. I'm not about, you know, a hierarchical, or maybe I am, a hierarchical reordering of the genius of First Peoples and the reversing from assimilation. We need to be thinking about Aboriginalising all of these spaces. If we were clever and smart, which I think I'm clever and smart, that's where the energy should be going, into Aboriginalising, quick, fast, now, and work it out. Everyone's got to work out what that means, because we all know, or we all should know, that the trajectory we're on is not only a genocide of us and all the categories of that. This is a planetary, nothing new, we all know, but we're all sitting and everyone's asleep. And we need the spark of Aunty Alma to wake up quick, because there's not much time left.
Well said, Aunt. And, just to touch on something you said there at the end, like as Uncle Robbie always says, genocide and ecocide equals suicide. And not just for us mob, for everyone that calls this planet home, which is, every single person here and outside of here as well. As long as we keep doing what we're doing, we as in people, not we as in black laws, that's the inevitable outcome that we're going to see. We're making this planet inhospitable for everyone and everything. On that note, we're going to go to a break. Oh, we're actually right on time. What do you know? So after about half an hour, at 8 o'clock, we're going to kick off again, and then we're going to have Uncle Robbie talking about the Crime Scene Australia campaign and where all that's at the moment, and Aunty Sue talking a bit about the stuff that's happening out on her country, and how everyone can support both of those campaigns. But yeah, go get a feed and enjoy it.